When you're approaching companies that you think might be important partners or customers or whatever, it's really important to make sure that you're talking to the right people. An individual at a big company might have the right title, but when you get to know the company and the dynamics, you realize, actually, no, she really doesn't like this stuff. So ask yourself, what might my customers want in the future if they could have anything at all? Life is short, so wherever you are on this journey, find some things that you're just naturally interested in learning about and focus a little bit of time on those. Not only will you be more effective at that, you'll live a better life. You'll be happy.
Thank you for coming on, Rob. And if you wouldn't mind just telling us, give us a high-level definition of proximity and why the concept matters now, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, which most of our audience is.
Great. Well, David and Becky, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation and learning from the two of you as well. Proximity, I'll back up briefly. The concept started in 2014. I was at a tech conference, and I was in my early days as a venture investor. And I thought, all of the speakers keep saying the same stuff about the future, like everything's going to be connected. And I was thinking, well, you really don't need to tell this audience that. I mean, if you don't know that, you probably shouldn't be here. So we need better foresight. And what I did was I thought about this in context of my early days studying economics. And in economic theory, there's something called a general purpose technology. Now, it's a coincidence that's a GPT, generative pre-trained transformer, that's a coincidence. Although AI is a general purpose technology. A GPT in that context is a technology that can be rolled out across an entire industry or an entire economy that is fundamentally different from the past. And if you can discern the difference from traditional technology to the new phase of technology, you can actually start to predict the future. And so the question I asked was, what is fundamentally different about digital compared to the industrial age? And by digital, David, I mean all sorts of digital, whether it's AI, mobile apps, 3D printing, rooftop solar, anything digitally enabled. And what you quickly realize is two things. First of all, digital allows us to compress all sorts of capabilities into smaller and smaller packages and distribute them all over the economy, ever closer to each moment in time and space. And second, and this is proximity, digital, therefore, compels value creation ever closer to the moment of actual demand. So we're not just saying better supply chain management, responding faster to customers. Everybody wants to do that. That's great. But we're literally saying setting up technology platforms and business models to encourage us to procrastinate, to wait as long as possible until there's an actual customer with a specific set of needs, and then create and provide that value right there at that moment. And that's proximity. It's predictive of where every industry is going the rest of our careers. It's been at work for quite a while now. We unpack that in the book Proximity. We give a lot of examples. We also give some examples to where it's going in the near to long-term future. We can come back to that.
I'd like to dig into that a little bit, actually. Some of the things, so I listened to the book, and some of the things that I was hearing seemed quite far-fetched, but also not too far away. So, for example, one of the things that I remember that stuck out to me was being able to 3D print organs in your home, which is an incredible thing we would be able to do. Could you share some more examples for the audience's sake of some of the things that might seem crazy, but actually aren't that far away?
Well, there are quite a few. And in the book, Becky, we look at how we work, how we eat, how we create and produce, how we prevent and cure, how we power and how we defend. And in the last chapter, we look at virtual reality and space, because those are the two horizons of the 21st century. We've never really been there before. And both of those are 100% proximate. We can come back to that if you like. But just to give you a couple examples, one of my favorites is, as I was going through the research early days for the book, I was looking for what we call counter examples. Situations where, this proximity thing is nice, but it's not going to happen in XYZ for a really long time, maybe ever. And one of the spaces we thought of was like pharmaceutical drugs. So I thought, pharmaceutical drugs have to be perfectly manufactured. They're highly regulated. If something goes wrong, someone might die. People might go to jail. So this is going to take a really, really long time. Turns out it's not true. There was research that was founded by DARPA, that now has been spun out as a company called On Demand Pharmaceuticals. You can look it up. Their equipment is about the size of a refrigerator, and it sits there with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in it. Now, there are APIs if you're into pharmaceuticals, but set that aside. It's basically carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And it sits there doing nothing until a doctor or a nurse or someone types in, I need 1,000 doses of atropine, for instance. And hours later, out come 1,000 doses of atropine, exactly the same as you would get at the pharmacy. And the FDA has already confirmed that this equipment can make almost any generic drug you want. And the output is exactly the same as you'd get at CVS. And so this is, you can start to, when you think about the model, you can start to see how profoundly these proximate opportunities will change economics, dynamics, entire industries.
I'd like to take maybe a big step back for a moment and ask you if you could share the turning point or the turning moment in fourth grade when you realized your passion for innovation and how that led you on the path here.
David and Becky, I have to say, you guys do your research. I'm not even sure I was cognizant in the fourth grade, but what happened was I went to the school library, and for maybe some of your Gen Z and millennial audience members, there were these things called libraries at schools, and they had books, much like this, and they were on shelves. Anyway, so I went to the library and I checked out this book called American Heritage, Illustrated Book of Men and Their Inventions. It was a history of the Industrial Revolution. And I have to tell you, I was enthralled. I was hooked. So I checked it out again, and I checked it out again. And then you couldn't check it out anymore. So then I kept it. I basically stole the book. And then the librarian called my mom, and I got in big trouble. Clearly I didn't have any friends, David, but I knew at that point in my life I would be involved in innovation. I didn't know if I would be an entrepreneur or a technologist or a designer or a professor or researcher. I had no idea, but I knew this innovation thing was for me.
You mentioned kind of not necessarily knowing where that was going to end up, but that was a driver for you towards innovation, and probably where proximity eventually came from. What do you see in terms of, you think of SMBs that want to get to proximity? They're not quite sure how to get there. It seems like it's a huge cost or a lot of barriers in the way. What would you say to them?
So this concept is equally relevant for a large established enterprise, a government organization, big nonprofit, or a brand new entrepreneur, or the operator of an SME. The reason is that it's coming for all of us. And if you have customers, or if you want to have customers, you've got to recognize that in the future, they're going to have more and more options. And so one thing you can do as a business owner is try and get ahead of that. And the best question I like to ask is go back to what it means to be in business. You're there to serve customers. So an exploratory question I would ask is, ask yourself, what might my customers want in the future if they could have anything, anywhere, anytime? By the way, that's our tagline for proximity: anything, anywhere, anytime. And that's where every industry is going. Now, understand what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you come up with an idea and then bang, you can do it next week. But some of them you will find opportunities. Hey, you know what? We can start to experiment with that right now. There are things with, for instance, generative AI that I can start doing on the fly that I couldn't do even a year ago. So ask yourself, what might my customers want in the future if they could have anything at all? And then what you're going to find is, over the next decade or so, increasingly more and more of those things will be possible. And because you've thought about them in advance, you'll be more likely to see them than your competitors. I could give you an example of a company that does that over and over again, if you like.
Please.
So this is not an SME anymore, but it started as one. It's a company called Axon, AXON, publicly traded, about 40-some billion dollar market cap. But it was founded by the current CEO, Rick Smith. He's basically Tony Stark. And that's not an exaggeration. He developed the first commercial scale Taser in his garage in Scottsdale. In fact, I think it was his mom's garage, but set that aside. And they came to market with Taser. It was a big success. Company went public. But he said, rather than just iterating on Tasers, which is what most companies would do, he said, we're going to keep doing that. But I want to ask a question. What might my public safety, security, police force customers want in the future if they could have anything? And so they continue to push the envelope, even into places where they have no expertise today, because their philosophy is, Axon's philosophy is, we're here to serve customers, and if they're going to want something, we need to figure out how to get it to them. So I could go into details, but they have the by far leading portfolio of drone technology capabilities for police forces anywhere in America. No one's close to them. They, as soon as generative AI launched with ChatGPT, they put a team together and they took the body cam police data, which they pioneered as well. And there's an AI system they call Draft One that's already launched. It's already in operation. Officers using the body cam needs to fill out a police report. They push a button, and within seconds, the police report is automatically completed. Now, they have to make sure that it says what they want it to say, because they have to put their name on it, so it's legal. But these kinds of things happen more at Axon because they ask this fundamental question: what might my customers want in the future if they could have anything? And then when the opportunity arises, they see it before everybody else.
That's fascinating. And that opens up a couple of questions I'd like to ask you, Rob. Starting with one, using chess as an analogy. With a move, ideally, you would want optionality. So whatever your adversary chooses, you have some benefit. Perhaps there's tiered benefits. There's an ideal scenario and a second tier scenario, et cetera. When you mentioned Axon and using body cam footage, they started with this fundamental question: what would my customers want? Is that, do you think, connected to building in that optionality, or was that like a happy accident they discovered looking back? Hey, we've got this body cam footage. What are some of the things we could do with that? Does that make sense, or do you need me to rephrase the question?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. The reality is it's actually both, because my understanding of where the body cam concept came from is they were looking at problems that police forces were having in sort of explaining the situation or reviewing what happened in a case where an officer is being taken to task, for instance. And so the simple answer, not easy to implement, but the simple answer is, well, why don't we just have video and audio of every interaction, and then we can go back and look. And so they said, okay, well, let's try and figure that out. And then they moved from there to build it. But, along the process, there are always unexpected things you learn along the way. A great little story about the Taser that Rick shared with me. I did a long interview with Rick and his president, Josh Isner. You can find a video of this online. But they shared a story early on with Tasers. Rick told me, because of early success, he had this sort of Steve Jobs complex, which is like, oh, if I can come up with it, everybody's going to want it. And he realized quickly that was not the case. So he told his team to develop this Taser that was going to have all these capabilities and be so much better. And some officers came in to look at the pilot, and they said, hey, this is nice, Rick, but this is too darn heavy. No one's going to carry this. I don't want to carry this around. And he said, I was confident I was Steve Jobs. So I said, ignore them, take this to market. It didn't work. And so they realized what they had to do was try and get those capabilities, but also conform to what officers desire to carry around with them, and listen better to customers, which doesn't sound like a profound insight, but it's related to recognizing you can make some mistakes, something can go wrong, but if you pay attention, you can actually turn it into an opportunity.
I would imagine that some of the things that smaller enterprises could do is work on maybe one of those. What do we already have, and how can we make it available anytime? Or how can we make it available any place? Or we already have that in place. What other things can we offer? Would that be one of the maybe steps that you would suggest that smaller organizations use to get there? Or do you kind of go hard on all three of those, aim for that as part of your innovation?
Oh, I see. Well, a couple of thoughts. First of all, if you're interested in exercising the concept of proximity, and it doesn't have to be expensive, in the appendix of the book, we have the proximity strategy workbook. And you don't need me there to go through the process, say, answer this question, consider this question. And we have a couple of templates you can fill out. And we've used them, Kai-Han Krippendorf, my co-author, and I've used them in a number of different contexts. And what you do when you're going through this exercise is we say, don't let reality get in the way at first. Obviously, we have to reintroduce reality. But when you're ideating, don't let reality get in the way. It's not going to cost you anything. Just think as freely as possible. And then after you've done that, work backwards to today. And what we inevitably find is you're going to find a few things that you can do in the relatively near term that don't have to be expensive to move a little closer to that, what we call P equals zero. And P equals zero means proximity equals zero, where production and provision of value is immediate in time and space with demand. The other thing I'd add to that is a guideline that every organization, regardless of size, needs to use to manage risk of exploration and innovation. And that is, in the early stages, I'm not talking about when you're tooling up and getting ready to go out to market, but in the early stages of exploration and innovation, do not manage the rate of failure, manage the cost of learning. What do I mean by that? The more likely a new idea is to change the market in the future, the more likely it is to look completely stupid at the beginning. And I do mean stupid. There are lots of examples of this. Now, the problem is every time you or your colleague comes up, or I come up with a stupid idea, you can't say, here's $1 million, Rob, let's go. I mean, because your company will go out of business. So what do you do instead? Well, you look for small experiments, small activities, maybe even as inexpensive as going out and meeting with a customer and having a conversation that can resolve some of the uncertainty of that idea with almost no money to manage the cost of learning. And then as you resolve uncertainty of that opportunity and gain more confidence, then you can start to build a business case around it. And then you get to a point where, okay, now we have more confidence in this possibility. We can put some real money and people behind it. And that's, by the way, that's how a company with one employee should operate. That's how a company with 100,000 employees should operate in the early stages. So I as an entrepreneur and an investor, I invest a lot in venture, and a lot of the companies I work with in very early stages, even pre-funding, we have those conversations.
I really like that. The cost of learning. That's often how I look at things as well. Business owners often stay in their bubble, their industry bubble, that is. How can they practically build and sustain a more diverse network that sparks ideas and opportunities, that cross-pollination I mentioned earlier?
Well, boy, that's a great question. Totally understand the demands on independent entrepreneurs and founders, especially of companies, and there's smaller companies. Your whole life is invested in this. You get to know everything about the industry. You get to know all the people involved, all the companies, all the competitors, all the partners and customers, hopefully. But it doesn't leave much time to color outside those lines. And the reality is, when change is happening faster and it's more volatile, it's not just faster. When new capabilities and technologies are rising on a regular basis, it's dangerous to stay too focused on your current line of business, your current industry. So what do? I mean, you can't know everything. So I refer to this as searching at the peripheries and building networks of diverse relationships. What I recommend people do is think about some capabilities, some industries outside yours, some expertise that's not right in your company or even in your industry that you think maybe in the future might be relevant and hopefully even interesting. I would look for stuff that you just find interesting. Where does your natural inclination take you? Don't look for business relevance all the time. Have the discipline to be strategically unfocused. So what I mean is that let's say you're in an industry where virtual reality is not involved at all, okay, and you're not even sure it's going to be for a while, but you find it interesting, or your son or daughter finds it super exciting. Well, learn from them. Ask them, well, what are you seeing? Why is this interesting to you? What's the most compelling stuff? Leverage, this is child labor. It's right there at your house. Leverage that because they're doing it out of intrinsic motivation. Another thing you can do is say, I'm going to reach out on, and this is how you and I met, David, I think on LinkedIn. Look on LinkedIn for people who just seem to really know what they're talking about virtual reality. Follow them for a bit. Maybe at some point, check in and say, hey, I read your article about such and such. I'm interested in more. Why do you do this? Well, because at some point that might be relevant for you, even as a business proposition. And then you have someone you already know. It's tough to reach out to someone when you need something from them, when you don't know them at all. So I would have the discipline to identify some capabilities, expertise, technologies, something in the world that you don't know much about, and just reach out and start to build relationships now, because they will become relevant in the future.
Like that. To me, it's kind of the definition of horizon search, right? Keep your eyes on the horizon, what's coming, even in fields that you're not necessarily an expert in, but that you want to learn more about, and that could dramatically change your industry.
Yeah. And by the way, Becky, if you're already an expert in something, how many additional experts do you need around you in that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's good to have people to check your work, but you really
Yeah.
need people who come from other backgrounds with other expertise to bring those things to bear for your customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and bring ideas that you would never even think to have.
Yes.
Which is the beauty of that cross-pollination again that David referenced.
Right on. Yep.
I want to come back to, because you referenced your involvement in VC. So I want to understand from an investor standpoint, what do you look for in potential businesses that you'd support in terms of their proximity to proximity?
Well, so I invest actively privately through venture funds and also directly as a venture investor. And then I also invest in public markets. One of the things I look for, not surprisingly, is, are these companies pushing the envelope in terms of proximity? Do they have reasons to believe, or maybe even evidence of their performance so far, that they're driving proximity ahead of everybody else in their industry? So Axon was an example. For some time, believe it or not, Domino's Pizza was an example. Domino's, and they didn't do so well in public markets last year, but for the years leading up to that, they performed, for the 10 years leading up to last year, they performed better than Google in public markets if you had invested in them. And what they realized was that consumers weren't only interested in the pizza and the speed of delivery. They also realized that consumers were interested in being able to check and see where their pizza was. Where's my pizza? Oh, it's being prepared. Oh, it's on the way. Now, we're used to that today because Uber Eats does it, everybody does it. But years ago, when Domino's did this, nobody was thinking about that. And it turns out consumers loved that sense of confidence that they knew where their pizza was. So I look for companies that are driving proximity. In the venture side, the private side, one thing I'll share is I do some very, very early stage investments. So angel level, seed stage. These are usually before they're even revenues. And to be honest, there isn't a lot of due diligence you really can do. You can make stuff up by looking at spreadsheets that are meaningless. But really, in the very earliest stages, what you're doing is you're saying, do I trust this person or this small team enough to commit? Do I think they've got a shot? Do I think that they personally have what it takes to suffer the slings and arrows, to course correct, to learn, to be, et cetera? And second, do I kind of think the idea, the technology, whatever, has a real shot? And if those two are yes, there's a good chance I'll invest. But Becky, when it comes to, once you get to stage B and C and those, unless I'm doing a follow-on investment of something I'm already in, so I know a lot about it, I don't make any investments in B and C myself. I only do those through as a limited partner in some venture funds. The reason is professional venture capital funds, if you find good ones, that's their job. They have the team, they have the time. That's their objective, to go do the deep due diligence. So when you're in Series C, they've got revenues, they've got customers, they've got internal organizational problems. The wheels are falling off the truck. All companies at that stage, the wheels are falling off the truck. You should hopefully have enough wheels. So I rely on professional venture investors to do that kind of deep due diligence, and then I just participate as an LP.
You've had a front row seat to some transformative ideas at Twin Global. What are 2 or 3 big lessons an SMB leader can take away from the cross-industry collaborations you've seen?
Oh, wow. Well, actually, incidentally, the on-demand pharmaceuticals that I mentioned earlier, where they can produce pharmaceuticals on demand anywhere, that came through Twin. Another Twinian said, hey, there's this crazy army doctor, Dr. Jeffrey Ling, I want you to meet. And so I said, great. And that led to on-demand pharmaceuticals being part of the book and all this. I didn't invest in them because that's not the sort of thing that I would normally invest in. But in terms of collaborations, here's one really significant insight that took me a while to learn and understand how profoundly important it was. Early in my career, I decided to focus on big established companies and governments and how they innovate. So my research and teaching has not so much been about being an entrepreneur, although I love that. I work with entrepreneurs, I invest in entrepreneurs. But my research and teaching has been, how do you define and implement and fund and support innovation within a big company, for instance? And part of that equation, of course, becomes if you're an executive at a big company, find entrepreneurs, find technology experts who are independent, who don't want to work for you full time, build relationships with them and partner with them because they can move fast. They have ideas that you may or may not have, but they're probably buried somewhere and can't get heard. So I tell executives, figure out ways to build trusted relationships with that group of people, so you have access to their expertise and brilliance and passion. And then I tell SME leaders, when you're approaching companies that you think might be important partners or customers or whatever, it's really important to make sure that you're talking to the right people. And when I say that, oh yeah, of course, that's obvious. It's often not obvious. An individual at a big company might have the right title. It might even say do you remember business cards? Might even say the right title on their business card and like, oh, she's exactly the person I need to talk to. But when you get to know the company and the dynamics, you realize, actually, no, she really doesn't like this stuff. So I've got to talk to this other person over here who's not even in that department. So I tell entrepreneurs and SME leaders, find the companies you want to engage with, and then spend your time learning about the players. Who are the people, the individuals? What drives them? What are their incentives and interests? And here's what you're going to do. You're going to find a few people who really want to talk to you, really want to partner and work together. And then they're going to be your Sherpa. They're going to help you navigate within these big companies. And the faster you can get to trusted relationships with a few people like that, the better off you're going to be.
It makes so much sense. And it really ultimately still comes down to the value of people. I know AI is on the horizon and we'll see when it takes us, but it's the value of people and their ideas. And the sum, what's the phrase you always say, David? The sum of the...
Oh, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts?
Yeah, there you go. That's David says it nice and magic.
Yeah, the worst situations are when the whole is less than the sum of the parts. Then we really have a problem.
I want to come back to, because I'm fascinated by each of the different themes that you looked at within the book. You said you looked into the way we work, food, healthcare, defense. From an author's perspective, how did you and your co-author get that information? Where did you do the research? Who did you speak to? And how long did it take you to gather all of these different things, which probably by the time published, there's already new innovations on some of them anyway? How did you do that?
Well, jumping on the last question you asked, Becky, first, which is, and there are new innovations already and it's changing all the time. That's true for sure. But what does not change, and part of the reason we committed the time to write this book, is the underlying premise will be evergreen, at least as far as I can see the rest of my career and our careers, because it only says one simple thing. Digital allows us to compress capabilities, distribute them all over the place, and therefore will compel value creation ever closer to the moment of demand. And that insight's going to be relevant for a very long time. Now, as you say, the details will look different. 10 years, if we were having a conversation about this thing called video streaming 10 years ago, people would have been like, oh, wow, video streaming. Yeah, I can. But now they're like, okay, great. What do you got for me lately? But just to pick on video streaming, almost all video content the provision of that content is already 100% proximate. So you can go to Netflix, YouTube, Disney Plus, but the production of that video content is usually months prior, or maybe even decades if you're watching Citizen Kane. But here's the thing, with generative AI, we're on the knee of the curve, the very beginning of video content created on the real time for audience of one. And this is where things are definitely going to go. This is not, I wonder if one day. No, this is definitely going that direction. So you can predict the future. And so this stuff will continue to be relevant. In terms of research, honestly, Kaihan and I sat down and said, what are the big industry spaces we want to engage? Because, we couldn't do everything, but we came pretty close. And then how do we organize them in a rational way? And then Kaihan had some strong expertise in a couple of these spaces. I had strong expertise in a couple of these spaces. And then we looked across our Rolodex, or our network, our LinkedIn. So we started certainly doing online research and finding case examples and all that. But we also reached out to 2 or 3 real industry experts for each of the chapters. We talked to them first. We wrote our first version of each chapter. Then we shared the chapter with those 2 or 3 industry experts and said, tell us where we're crazy. What did we get wrong? What are we missing? And they helped us beat up each of these chapters because we wanted to make sure, Becky, that we didn't publish the book and someone from the electricity industry would say, you guys are idiots. You have no idea how it works. Kaihan and I realized we know something about the defense space, but not enough. And that industry is the most peculiar, the most non-obvious. And so I brought in a very good friend and longtime colleague, Mike Lippitz, who had been in the Pentagon under Bill Perry and has spent his entire career in the defense markets. He co-authored the defense chapter with us to make sure that we didn't screw it up.
You talk about renewing and activating vision by changing context. For professionals who might be feeling stuck, what does that look like in smaller, more attainable steps?
Oh, great. So, the whole question about if you feel stuck and where you want to go, that's a tough one. And I hear it a lot from, I teach at Kellogg and Booth, 2 business schools. And so I'll get mid-career, very successful executives, entrepreneurs, et cetera. And they'll say, I've been doing this for the last 15 years. I don't know if I want to do it anymore. What do I do? And ultimately, David, it's our own personal responsibility. Love it, change it, or leave it. So with that sort of philosophical note aside, one thing I would do is say, well, think about a few things, a few topics, industries, technologies, whatever, that if in 3 years you're spending a bunch of your time on that, you would find that really interesting. So make a list. And don't let your current situation get in the way of this. Just say in your ideal world. And then after you've identified a couple things that resonate with you, then say, okay, let me go out and find a couple people who really know this stuff. And like I said before, and start to follow them. Another thing you can do, and I love doing this, is find an industry conference that is not your industry. Now, to be practical, find one that's kind of close to your industry or related, where you could kind of make the case as to why you would waste a day and a half at this, bizarre conference. Find something that's kind of interested, but a little bit outside your normal swim lane. And go to the conference, sit in on some of the sessions, walk around and meet some of the people. When they don't get a lot of visitors at the Computational Fluid Dynamics Conference, but sometime in the future, when your company needs a CFD expert, you're going to be the one that knows them. So I would once or twice a year go to something that you wouldn't normally go to, that just seems interesting, that's somehow vaguely related to the business you do. And things will go from there.
I love that too. Again, it just, the horizon search image just keeps coming to my mind. It's constantly looking for what's outside of your norm and outside of your world and venturing into the unknown of it. I wonder if you could share some more based on the research that you did do and the conversations you had and the amount of time and energy and effort that went into this book. I wonder if you can share some of your predictions for how our lives will change day to day as we get closer to proximity in some of these areas.
Well, I mentioned one, this is already happening, video content being created real time for an audience of one in the moment. So the video in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So one of the things I ask people is, we can actually predict the future. We can predict the contours of the future. We can't see the details, but we can predict the contours. So one question I ask people is, will AI get more effective? And then some cheeky person will say, well, it depends on what you mean by, no, come on. Will it get more capable? And the obvious answer is yes. It's not going to get less capable. Will virtual reality be increasingly experienced as more and more realistic? Yes, of course. Okay, if we take that as an assumption, where might the world go? Now, in the last chapter of the book, I don't know how crazy you want to get. So maybe people should get the book.
They're really crazy.
Get really crazy? Okay, all right. And this is actually setting up for my next book I'm working on right now with neuroscientist Moran Cerf. And it's actually going to be a little bit different book. It's more of a future-focused philosophical experiment called post-virtual. And what post-virtual explores is, post-virtual is a very specific definition. We define it as after the point you cannot tell the difference experientially between virtual reality and default reality. Default reality is normal life, right? After you can't tell the difference experientially between virtual reality and default reality, we will be in the post-virtual world. And by the way, this will happen this century. I don't know if that's 10 years from now or 50 years from now, but Moran and I don't care. That's not this project. We're not doing date predictions. But he's been studying the neuroscience of this for a long time. And he said, science has discovered nothing standing in the way of us having direct brain-machine interfaces that provide any experience you want, anywhere, anytime. You see proximity? And that's going to come. Now, how we get there, I don't know. What the challenges are going to be along the way, we already know some of them. The brain starts to reject implants, but this is what like Elon Musk's Neuralink is working on. And guess what's happening? These are engineering problems. It's getting better and better. It's not violating any laws of physics, but it's getting better and better. And we will get there. We will get there.
Makes you wonder if we already have, to some extent.
If we were
I
to what?
often wonder if I'm in the Matrix. If we already have bridged that gap and we're already in the post-virtual world.
Well, I mean, you're talking about, Becky, people hypothesizing that maybe we're already in the Matrix, so to speak. I actually think that's a very real likelihood. But the difference here in this case will be right now we're existing without knowing we're in that. Whereas later this century, God willing, hopefully, we'll be able to be in those environments and have the decision, the authority to not be in those environments, to know that we're in them and be able to remove ourselves from them if we so desire. So that'd be a pretty significant difference from where we are right now if we're in a simulation.
Yeah, we can take the red or the blue pill.
Yes, exactly. Or both. I want a purple pill.
Yeah, I was
oh, wait, that's Prilosec. That's for gastroesophageal reflux disease. Anyway, sorry.
So you're not in the date prediction game, but can you give us an idea of when to expect your second book?
Yeah, I can. It'll be a couple of years, but the second book, Post Virtual, is actually going to be an art book. It's going to be a big coffee table art book with no technology in it at all about the far future. So see, it's ironic that I would have a big printed physical book with no tech about the
only sold at libraries.
Yeah, I mean, we're not even sure. I don't care about selling that one, honestly. We're even, Moran and I are even thinking about producing it and only giving it to people as a gift, so you can't buy it. But we don't know yet. I expect, David, that at some point in this process we will also write a more typical book about post-virtual. But we're focused on the art book thing first.
That sounds fascinating. One thing that I'm enthralled by is that all the smart people that I have the privilege of speaking with don't know what's going to happen as soon as, like, once we reach a critical point where the machines are smarter than we are at everything, the singularity. It's not like a linear ramp up like Moore's law, where it's like there's a doubling every year or so, and we can kind of predict what we may have. Right now, this video conference would be magic, probably when you were a kid, like science fiction. How could you talk to someone in your hand? Like, see there, that's amazing. And here we take it for granted pretty quickly. I don't think it's going to be that same thing again. I think it will be much more than that, with the same passage of time, perhaps even less passage of time. So yeah, it's hard to say. I think you're probably right when you say this century. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the first half, though, of the century.
I'm gonna agree with you. But I always like the sandbag on date predictions because I can give you real color about where things are going. But by avoiding date predictions, then I don't get that annoying email. You said it would happen by 2028 and it took till 2030. I mean, come on.
It's a safe hedge. Yeah, you don't get criticized for being conservative
Yes.
when a date is early, but you do if you're too aggressive with the prediction.
Yes.
So yeah, fair point.
Unless you're Elon Musk, where he throws dates out all the time and no one cares.
Well, you know what? Let's look at that. Why do you think he gets away with it? My thinking is that sometimes he hits it, and those are big enough hits that people are like, they'll give him a pass. Yeah. If you strike, like if you hit a sufficient like grand slam, let's say to use a baseball analogy, does that allow you some misfires?
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of reasons why he would be given a pass for stuff like that, but I think the main one is he's proven that he can make the future happen over and over again. And David and Becky, we all have to win the right to innovate. And I think it's safe to say that Elon Musk has won the right to innovate, and he's won the right for people to listen to him and take what he says seriously. If he gets some of his self-driving car dates a little bit wrong, you know what? I'm on board. It's going to happen, and it's going in our lifetimes. We are going to hope that there are no human drivers on the road, because if you look at the data, you're not going to want human. And imagine that we ever trusted some random human being you don't know, driving 2 tons of steel and plastic down the street. And we're like, oh yeah, that's totally normal. I mean, our kids are going to look back at us and say we were nuts.
What is one key piece of advice you'd like to leave our audience with about staying ahead of rapid changes brought about by proximity? How can they remain agile and optimistic during these transformations?
Well, this might sound a little squishy, but I really mean this. Life is short. So wherever you are on this journey, return to some things that you find really interesting, compelling, intrinsically motivating. You still need to keep the business operating, or somebody does, but find some things that you're just naturally interested in learning about, staying abreast of, et cetera, and focus a little bit of time on those, because not only will you be more effective at that because you're interested, you'll live a better life. You'll be happier. And that means your family members will be happier, and the people that work for you will be happier. So I would say find the stuff that really lights your fire and go out and light it.
Fair point. Well taken. Becky?
I have one more question for you, which is kind of taking a bit of a route somewhere else, but I just wonder what you think about this. As the rate of changing technology gets quicker and quicker and quicker to what we were speaking about before, do you think there comes a point where human beings cannot evolve socially and emotionally quick enough to keep up with the rate of change from a technological perspective?
Yes. I mean, we've already passed that. Think about all of the stories of the scourge of loneliness that people are experiencing, and how social skills are under threat, because it's a different experience interacting with a screen than it is interacting with a human, or a human on a screen like we are right now. And so I think we're already experiencing those stresses. One bit of advice I got early on as a parent, when my first daughter, Jolie, I have 2, Jolie and Sage, they're 15 and 14. When they were first born, I talked to a number of people, and I noticed that the closer my friends were to Silicon Valley and the tech industry, the more likely they were to restrict screen time. In fact, to keep screens away from their kids until a certain age. And that struck me. And so my wife Ada and I didn't allow Jolie and Sage to have an iPad or anything, any screens, until they were 6, unless it was like, watching it on a TV screen with us, like a cartoon or something. Of course we did that, but they couldn't have their own iPad until I think they were like 9 or 10. and they were both the second to last, coincidentally, the second to last kid in their class that got their own iPhone. And God bless them. They would complain a little bit here and there, but they actually understood why we were doing it. So they never tried well, all of my friends have one, because they knew that wasn't going to work, right? And I like to think, no way to know for sure, I like to think that helped them. The other thing that we did is, and we still do, none of us, not the parents, not the kids, nobody can have the screen up during dinner. When we're at dinner, we're together. Now, if there's an emergency or some reason why we have to look something up, we all agree, okay, Dad, you can take the phone, or Mom, you can take the phone. But otherwise, no phones at all. And as parents, you've got to show that you're committed to that too. It's not do what I say, not what I do. That doesn't work. So I would say it's really important. Start with the home and think about what this all means. And now, look, the girls are equally as tech savvy as all their friends. It doesn't matter that you're 1.5 and, oh my gosh, look, she can use an iPad. I mean, how hard is it to use a friggin' iPad, right? So I would honestly restrict screens as long as possible, as long as reasonable, and ease them into it. And they're going to be right along with their friends. They're not going to be behind at all.
I like that. I was speaking to a colleague yesterday about when I grew up. I'd ask my parents the definition of a word, and they'd tell me to look it up. And I hated that because I had to walk to the bookshelf, find the encyclopedia. It was the Encyclopedia Britannica. We had this like large kind of collection, and I had to think, okay, it starts with an M. Where's M? Okay, there's M. Then I go in and I look through, and it was laborious. It took probably 5 minutes, but to a child, that seems like an eternity. But you know what happened? I remembered the definition after that. It became part of what I used. And I would go, like, it became a muscle that I used because I knew when I asked, they're going to tell me to do that anyway. So then it basically, it taught me how to learn, or it added another layer to my learning, I should say. So I think whatever that looks like at the home might be good to think about as well.
Well, now they just say, ask Alexa or Siri, you know.
And it may pollinate a little bit, but I think it's in one ear, out the other. If there's less investment on acquiring the knowledge, I think there'll be less value in retaining it.
Good point. Great point.
Proximitybook.net is where people it's a beautiful site. It lays out a lot of the points in the book. People can purchase the book at the usual book places. It's nice to see Barnes & Noble on there, as well as Amazon, of course. Is there anywhere else that you would like to point our audience, Rob, where they can follow with what you're doing?
No, proximitybook.net is great. But in terms of me in general, I'm always on LinkedIn. Reach out. Please let me know that we met through Horizon Search, because obviously I can't see your audience here. But if you say, hey, I saw the conversation with David and Becky and would love to connect, pretty likely going to connect.
Great. Well, thank you for taking some time to talk with us today. It's fascinating. I could easily talk to you for another 5 hours, but we'll put a pin in this one.
Please, anytime you're in New Jersey, Ridgewood, New Jersey, stop by.
Thank you.